Algiers is the capital and largest city of Algeria. In 2011, the city's population was estimated to be around 3,500,000. An estimate puts the population of the larger metropolitan city to be around 5 million. Algiers is located on the Mediterranean Sea and in the north-central portion of Algeria, sometimes nicknamed El Beja or alternatively Alger la Blanche for the glistening white of its buildings as seen rising up from the sea. Algiers is situated on the west side of a bay of the Mediterranean Sea. The modern part of the city is built on the level ground by the seashore. The old part, the ancient city of the D's, climbs the steep hill behind the modern town and is crowned by the Kasbah or citadel, 122 meters above the sea. The Kasbah and the two keys form a triangle. Etymology: the city name is derived from the Arabic name Al-Jazariya, which translates as the islands, referring to the four islands which lay off the city's coast until becoming part of the mainland in 1525. Al-Jazariya is itself a truncated form of the city's older name Jazariya Bani Mazghana, the islands of the sons of Mazghana, used by early medieval geographers such as Al-Idrisi and Yaqut al-Hamawi. History: a Phoenician commercial outpost called Icosium, which later developed into a small Roman town called Icosium, existed on what is now the Marine Quarter of the city. The Rue de la Marine follows the lines of what used to be a Roman street. Roman cemeteries existed near Bab el-Wed and Bab Azoun. The city was given Latin rights by Emperor Vespasian. The bishops of Icosium are mentioned as late as the 5th century. The present-day city was founded in 944 by Baloina ibn Ziri, the founder of the Berber Zirid Sanhaja dynasty. He had earlier built his own house in a Sanhaja center at Ashir, just south of Algiers. Although his Zirid dynasty was overthrown by Roger II of Sicily in 1148, the Zirids had already lost control of Algiers to their cousins the Hamidids in 1014. The city was wrested from the Hamidids by the Almohads in 1159, and in the 13th century came under the dominion of the Ziyanid sultans of Tlemcen, nominally part of the Sultanate of Tlemcen. Algiers had a large measure of independence under emirs of its own due to Oran being the chief seaport of the Ziyanids. As early as 1302 the islet of Penon in front of Algiers harbour had been occupied by Spaniards. Thereafter, a considerable amount of trade began to flow between Algiers and Spain. However, Algiers continued to be of comparatively little importance until after the expulsion of the Moors from Spain, many of whom sought asylum in the city. In 1510, following their occupation of Oran and other towns on the coast of Africa, the Spaniards fortified the islet of Penon and imposed a levy intended to suppress corsair activity. Ottoman rule in 1516, the Emir of Algiers, Selim B. Qumi, invited the corsair brothers Aruj and Hayreddin Barbarossa to expel the Spaniards. Aruj came to Algiers, ordered the assassination of Selim, and seized the town and ousted the Spanish in the capture of Algiers. Hayreddin, succeeding Aruj after the latter was killed in battle against the Spaniards in the fall of Tlemcen, was the founder of the Pashalouk, which subsequently became the Beylik of Algeria. Barbarossa lost Algiers in 1524 but regained it with the capture of Algiers, and then formally invited the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent to accept sovereignty over the territory, and to annex Algiers to the Ottoman Empire. Algiers from this time became the chief seat of the Barbary pirates. In October 1541 in the Algiers expedition, the King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor Charles V sought to capture the city, but a storm destroyed a great number of his ships, and his army of some 30,000, chiefly made up of Spaniards, was defeated by the Algerians under their Pasha, Hassan, formerly part of the Ottoman Empire but essentially free from Ottoman control. Starting in the 16th century, Algiers turned to piracy and ransoming. Due to its location on the periphery of both the Ottoman and European economic spheres, and depending for its existence on a Mediterranean that was increasingly controlled by European shipping, backed by European navies. Piracy became the primary economic activity. Repeated attempts were made by various nations to subdue the pirates that disturbed shipping in the western Mediterranean and engaged in slave raids. As far north as Iceland, the United States fought 2 wars over Algiers attacks on shipping. Among the notable people held for ransom was the future Spanish novelist Miguel de Cervantes, who was captive in Algiers almost 5 years, and who wrote 2 plays set in Algiers of the period. The primary source for knowledge of Algiers of this period, since there are no contemporary local sources, is the Topographia y Historia General de Argel, published by Diego Dohido, but whose authorship is disputed. This work describes in detail the city, the behavior of its inhabitants, and its military defenses, with the unsuccessful hope of facilitating an attack by Spain so as to end the piracy. A significant number of renegades lived in Algiers at the time, Christians converted voluntarily to Islam, many fleeing the law or other problems at home. Once converted to Islam, they were safe in Algiers. Many occupied positions of authority. The city under Ottoman control was enclosed by a wall on all sides, including along the seafront. In this wall, 5 gates allowed access to the city, with 5 roads from each gate dividing the city and meeting in front of the Quechua Mosque. In 1556, a citadel was constructed at the highest point in the wall. A major road running north to south divided the city in 2. The upper city, which consisted of about 50 small quarters of Andalusian, Jewish, Moorish and Kabila communities, and the lower city, which was the administrative, military and commercial center of the city, mostly inhabited by Turkish dignitaries and other upper-class families. In August 1816, the city was bombarded by a British squadron under Lord Exmouth, assisted by Dutch men of war, destroying the corsair fleet harbored in Algiers. French rule. The history of Algiers from 1830 to 1962 is bound to the larger history of Algeria and its relationship to France. On July 4, 1830, under the pretext of an affront to the French consul, whom the Dey had hit with a fly-whisk when the consul said the French government was not prepared to pay its large outstanding debts to 2 Algerian merchants, a French army under General de Bourmont attacked the city in the 1830 invasion of Algiers. The city capitulated the following day. Algiers became the capital of French Algeria. Many Europeans settled in Algiers, and by the early 20th century they formed a majority of the city's population. During the 1930s, the architect Le Corbusier drew up plans for a complete redesign of the colonial city. Le Corbusier was highly critical of the urban style of Algiers, describing the European district as nothing but crumbling walls and devastated nature, the whole a sullied blot. He also criticized the difference in living standards he perceived between the European and African residents of the city, describing a situation in which the civilized live like rats in holes, whereas the barbarians live in solitude, in well-being. However, these plans were ultimately ignored by the French administration. During World War II, Algiers was the last city to be seized from the Germans by the Allies during Operation Torch. In 1962, after a bloody independence struggle in which hundreds of thousands died during fighting between the French army and the Algerian Front de Libération Nationale, Algeria gained its independence, with Algiers as its capital. Since then, despite losing its entire Pied Noir population, the city has expanded massively. It now has about 5 million inhabitants, or 10% of Algeria's population, and its suburbs now cover most of the surrounding Mittadar plain. Algerian War. Algiers also played a pivotal role in the Algerian War. particularly during the Battle of Algiers, when the 10th Parachute Division of the French Army, starting on January 7, 1957, and on the orders of then French Minister of Justice François Mitterrand, led attacks against the Algerian fighters for independence. Algiers remains marked by this battle, which was characterized by merciless fighting between FLN forces which carried out a guerrilla campaign against the French military and police and pro-French Algerian soldiers, and the French army, which responded with a bloody repression, torture and blanket terrorism against the native population. The demonstrations of May 13 during the crisis of 1958 provoked the fall of the Fourth Republic in France, as well as the return of General de Gaulle to power. Algeria achieved independence on July 5, 1962. Run by the FLN that had secured independence, Algiers became a member of non-aligned movement during the Cold War. In October 1988, 1 year before the fall of the Berlin Wall, Algiers was the site of demonstrations demanding the end of the single-party system and the creation of a real democracy baptized the Spring of Algiers. The demonstrators were repressed by the authorities, but the movement constituted a turning point in the political history of modern Algeria. In 1989, a new constitution was adopted that put an end to the reign of the single party and saw the creation of more than 50 political parties, as well as official freedom of the press. Crisis of the 1990s. The city became the theater of many political demonstrations of all descriptions until 1992. In 1991, a political entity dominated by religious conservatives called the Islamic Salvation Front engaged in a political test of wills with the authorities. In the 1992 elections for the Algerian National Assembly, the Islamists garnered a large amount of support in the first round, helped by a massive abstention from disillusioned Algerian voters. By the turn of events, fearing an eventual win by the Islamists, the army cancelled the election process, setting off a civil war between the state and armed religious conservatives which would last for a decade. On December 11, 2007, 2 car bombs exploded in Algiers. One bomb targeted 2 United Nations buildings and the other targeted a government building housing the Supreme Court. The death toll is at least 62, with over 200 injured in the attacks. However, only 26 remained hospitalized the following day. As of 2008 update, it is speculated that the attack was carried out by the Al-Qaeda cell within the city. Indigenous terrorist groups have been actively operating in Algeria since around 2002. Geography. Districts of Algiers. The Kasbah, i.e. district of Algiers, called Aljazair al-Marosa, it is founded on the ruins of old Icosium. It is a small city which, built on a hill, goes down towards the sea, divided into the high city and the low city. One finds there masonries and mosques of the 17th century, Ketchaoua Mosque flanked by 2 minarets. Mosque El Jedid with its large finished ovoid cupola points some and its 4 cupolettes. Mosque El Kayakut Bir, Mosque Ali Bechnin, Dar Aziza, Palette of Jenina. In the Kasbah, there are also labyrinths of lanes and houses that are very picturesque, and if one gets lost there, it is enough to go down again towards the sea to reposition oneself. Bab el-Wed, literally the river's gate, the popular district which extends from the Kasbah beyond the gate of the river. It is the capital's darling and best-liked borough, famous for its square with the 3 clocks, and for its market triplet. It is also a district of workshops and manufacturing plants. Edge of sea. From 1840, the architects Pierre-Auguste Guillarchain and Charles-Frédéric Chassériau designed new buildings apart from the Kasbah: town hall, law courts, buildings, theatre, palace of the governor, casino, to form an elegant walk bordered by arcades which is today the Boulevard Che Guevara. Koba. Koba is an old village which was absorbed by the expansion of the town of Algiers. A village. Koba quickly developed under the French colonial era, then continued growing due to formidable demographic expansion that Algiers knew after the independence of Algeria in 1962. It is today a district of Algiers which is largely made up of houses, villas and buildings not exceeding 5 stories. El Harrach, a suburb of Algiers, is located about 10 kilometers to the east of the city. The communes of Hydra, Ben Aknoun, El Biha and Bouzaria form what the inhabitants of Algiers call the Heights of Algiers. These communes shelter the majority of the foreign embassies of Algiers, of many ministries and university centers, which makes it one of the administrative and policy centers of the country. The street Didouche Mourada is located in the 3rd district of Algiers. It extends from the Grande Post Office to the Heights of Algiers. It crosses in particular the Place Ordine, the Faculty of Algiers, the Crowned Heart and the Park of Galland. It is bordered by smart stores and restaurants along most of its length. It is regarded as the heart of the capital. Climate: Algiers has a Mediterranean climate with hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters. Its proximity to the Mediterranean Sea aids in moderating the city's temperatures. As a result, Algiers usually does not see the extreme temperatures that are experienced in the adjacent interior deserts. Algiers on average receives roughly 600 millimeters of rain per year, the bulk of which is seen between October and April. Snow is very rare. In 2012, the city received 10 centimeters, its first snowfall in 8 years. Local architecture. There are many public buildings of interest, including the whole Casbah Quarter, Martyrs Square, the government offices, the Grand, New, and Ketchaoua mosques, the Roman Catholic Cathedral of Notre Dame d'Afrique, the Bardo Museum, the old Bibliothèque Nationale d'Alger, a Turkish palace built in 1799 to 1800, and the new National Library, built in a style reminiscent of the British Library. The main building in the Casbah was begun in 1516 on the site of an older building, and served as the Palace of the Dees until the French conquest. A road has been cut through the center of the building, the mosque turned into barracks, and the Hall of Audience allowed to fall into ruin. There still remain a minaret and some marble arches and columns. Traces exist of the vaults in which were stored the treasures of the day. The Great Mosque is the oldest mosque in Algiers. It was first built by Yusuf ibn Tashfin, but reconstructed many times. The pulpit bears an inscription showing that the building existed in 1097. The minaret was built by the Sultan of Tlemcen in 1324. The interior of the mosque is square and is divided into aisles by columns joined by Moorish arches. The new mosque, dating from the 17th century, is in the form of a Greek cross, surmounted by a large white cupola, with 4 small cupolas at the corners. The minaret is 27 meters high. The interior resembles that of the Grand Mosque. The Church of the Holy Trinity stands at the southern end of the Rue d'Isly near the site of the demolished Fort Babazoun. The interior is richly decorated with various colored marbles. Many of these marbles contain memorial inscriptions relating to the British residents of Algiers from the time of John Tipton, the first English consul, in 1580. One tablet records that in 1631 2 Algerine pirate crews landed in Ireland, sacked Baltimore. The Ketchaoua Mosque, at the foot of the Casbah, was before independence in 1962 the Cathedral of St. Philippe, itself made in 1845 from a mosque dating from 1612. The principal entrance, reached by a flight of 23 steps, is ornamented with a portico supported by 4 black-veined marble columns. The roof of the nave is of Moorish plaster work. It rests on a series of arcades supported by white marble columns. Several of these columns belong to the original mosque. In one of the chapels was a tomb containing the bones of San Geronimo. The building seems a curious blend of Moorish and Byzantine styles. Algiers possesses a college with schools of law, medicine, science and letters. The college buildings are large and handsome. The Bardo Museum in Tunisia holds some of the ancient sculptures and mosaics discovered in Algeria, together with medals and Algerian money. The port of Algiers is sheltered from all winds. There are two harbors, both artificial, the old or northern harbor and a southern or Aga harbor. The northern harbor covers an area of 95 hectares. An opening in the south jetty affords an entrance into Aga Harbor, constructed in Aga Bay. Aga Harbor has also an independent entrance on its southern side. The inner harbor was begun in 1518 by Kheyr ad-Din Barbarossa, who, to accommodate his pirate vessels, caused the island on which was Fort Pennon to be connected with the mainland by a mole. The lighthouse which occupies the site of Fort Pennon was built in 1544. Algiers was a walled city from the time of the D's until the close of the 19th century. The French, after their occupation of the city, built a rampart, parapet, and ditch, with two terminal forts, Babazan to the south and Bab el-Wed to the north. The forts and part of the ramparts were demolished at the beginning of the 20th century, when a line of forts occupying the heights of Bouzaria above the sea took their place. Notre Dame d'Afrique, a church built in a mixture of the Roman and Byzantine styles, is conspicuously situated overlooking the sea, on the shoulder of the Bouzaria Hills, 3 kilometers to the north of the city. Above the altar is a statue of the Virgin depicted as a black woman. The church also contains a solid silver statue of the Archangel Michael, belonging to the confraternity of Neapolitan fishermen. Villa Abd el-Tift, former residence of the day, was used during the French period, to accommodate French artists, chiefly painters, and winners of the Abd el-Tift Prize, among whom Maurice Boitel, for a while of 2 years. Nowadays, Algerian artists are back in the Villa studios.